Thanks, guys. Okay. Well, this morning we're going to continue our sermon series or our study in the first letter of Peter. So we're going to continue there this morning. So far, because this is the fifth sermon, so we find ourselves in chapter 3 now, the beginning of chapter 3. So far, we've talked about the topics from the first sermon, what it means for us as exiles, as kind of strangers in this world, because we are now citizens of heaven, and we have our focus and our hopes and our future in heaven. So we are, in a way, exiles, strangers in this world, because this world is temporarily for us as Christians. So we talked about what it means to live in this hope. We also talked what it means to live in holiness, that we reflect something of who God is in our lives, who He is and how we can reflect His holiness. We also talked about living in newness. We have received a new life. We are born again. We are forgiven. We have hope. We are cleansed, clean. And now we can walk with God, in union with God. We are reconciled with God. And that is being called born again. We hear the good news of the gospel. We come to repentance and we are unified with God again. Newness of life. Now, last week, Rob Darnell talked about living in submission to authorities and masters, which was a bit more of a difficult topic, because this is where some tensions are really starting to happen a bit more. But he talked about this, and this morning we're going to continue to talk particularly and mainly about marriage. Now, marriage, this can also be a tough topic. At the same time, marriage is something beautiful because it is given and created by God. So it is something that is beautiful to be, in a way, enjoyed in this life. But it also can be very difficult, painful, maybe even frustrating, and maybe even confronting when we read about marriage in the Bible. So when we are going to study this passage in 1 Peter chapter 3, it can be very encouraging. It can be painful. It can maybe bring back difficult memories or difficult situations. And I want you to know in front that there is mercy, that there is forgiveness, that there is help from God in whatever situation you are. God wants to be there. God wants to work in your life. He wants to comfort you if needed. But He also wants to if possible, make your marriage even better, or your future marriage, or supporting other marriages. So this topic is relevant in that regard for everyone, whether you're married or not, whether you're divorced, whether you're a widow or widower. This topic is relevant for everyone, because in the church family, we have marriages, and we hope that we have more marriages as well. And I'm so glad that at IBC, we have chosen to, the theological term is that we are choosing for expository preaching, which means we grab a letter or a book in the Bible and we preach through all of it, which gives me the excuse to teach all of it, which also makes it sometimes very difficult for me to teach all of it. But we believe firmly that the Bible is completely all breathed out by God. So it is God's word from beginning to end, everything. And we also believe in, Paul talks about it in 2 Timothy 3, it is all breathed by God, and it is also all beneficial for encouragement, for rebuking, for equipping. So there's no passage that has nothing to say to us. So this morning, marriage. Now, before we go into this passage, I think we need to quickly establish what the biblical definition of marriage is. So I put it on the screen. The biblical definition of marriage is one man and one woman in a covenant that is consummated. This is the kind of the shortest definition of the biblical marriage. One man and one woman in a covenant that is consummated. So not in a contract, Not in a cohabitational environment, no, in a covenant. You commit to each other, you vow to each other, and it is also one man and one woman. God created them male and female, and the male will leave his father and mother's house, and he will cleave or become one with his wife, which is female. So the biblical marriage is one man only, one woman, in a covenant relationship that is consummated. So this excludes, in a way, from the biblical perspective of marriage, gay marriage, polygamy, and cohabitation. Oh, right, tongue twisters. So this is the biblical definition. So this is our outset. Now, just because of time, we can't get into all the details because there's much more to say about this as well. But we want to get to our passage as well. But maybe in the outset as well, the general purpose of marriage from the Bible. So we now have established a definition of marriage, right? What is the purpose of marriage? Well, I have a few quotes from Tim Keller, from John Piper, and from ChristianFamily.com that I believe show us the biblical purpose of marriage. And I put above it on the title that marriage is not about you. This might be shocking, but it is not. You are involved in your marriage or in marriage relationships, or involved in other families or marriage relationships, like Dries and Zoet become part of this church. So we are now connected to each other. So we are involved in marriage, but it is not about you. It is about marriage is about two people living life together to reflect the gospel, helping each other to become more like Jesus. So the focus is, how can we serve in our marriage relationship the gospel and reflect the gospel? How can we help each other to become more like Christ? So the focus is not on our desires or our needs or our purposes. No, it is the gospel is the purpose. Jesus is the purpose. As John Piper says it, marriage is about displaying the gospel. Very simple. ChristianityFamily.com says it like this: God's first purpose for marriage is to reflect his image. So what you see here is a kind of three elements, three purposes of marriage. Number one is reflecting God's image. God made us as humans in his image. So this is what we read in Genesis. He made us in his image, male and female, he created them. So in his image. So as male and female, we reflect something of his image. So we reflect something of him. And that is a special thing as human beings, that we get to reflect something of God himself. This is amazing. This is an honor. This is a privilege. So number two is to display the gospel, as Paul talks about it in Ephesians chapter 5. Marriage, he says, sometimes it is a mystery, but I say this and I explain this, the relationship as the relationship between Christ and the church, to reflect the gospel. And thirdly, to help each other to become more like Jesus. Now, this happens in the marriage relationship, but this happens in all the relationships here, because we all want to help each other to become more like Christ. But the most intimate person in your earthly life, as adults at least, would be your spouse, to help you, to shape you, to become more like Jesus. So this is the biblical purpose. Now, if we have established that, so the biblical definition of marriage, one male, one female in a covenant relationship that is consummated. The biblical purpose, reflect God's image, display the gospel, help each other to become more like Jesus. Okay, let's now get into our passage for this morning. 1 Peter chapter 3, and we're first going to read verse 1 to 7. Let's read it. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see a respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Wow. If we would go stand in the city center of Eindhoven, and we would read this passage about marriage, I'm sure we're going to get some feedback on this one. We will get some reaction and response on this passage, right? And to be fair, I think it's also not always easy for us as followers of Christ, because we are shaped by our context, we are shaped in our culture, and then we come to God and then we want to follow him, and then we sometimes struggle with how God has intended it to be. Now, I think the main message here in this passage is twofold. One, for women to subject and respect their husbands. That's number one. Number two is for husbands to live in an understanding way with their wives, honoring them. Okay. So these are two points. And I think they are equally as challenging. Well, we'll get to that. Okay. Now, let me first say this. We because this is often what kind of comes up, and we need to process this, because Peter is writing in a time about 2,000 years ago, which often has been portrayed, and to some extent it is true, that in that time it was a different culture with different role models between husbands and wives, and even men and women in general in that culture. You could nowadays, you would maybe put even the label on it, like that's a bit of a chauvinistic culture. So a chauvinistic culture means men are ruling, men are dominating, and men, because of their ruling and dominating, they can abuse and use easily. Now, today, we have added an element to that. We have still chauvinism, because women are still used and abused. And I'll get there in a minute, which is terrible, and it is frequent, and it happens too much. Also, what we have been adding in this time is feminism, the other extreme. Now, when it comes to the using and abusing, kind of the chauvinistic way, it still happens. If we look at figures of domestic violence, who is more often the victim? The guy or the lady? The lady. By far, the lady is more often the victim of domestic violence, of sexual abuse. In the United States, they say 1 in 4 women will have to deal at one point in their life with domestic violence. And that is not just a little shove. No, that is what that is meant is that there's injury. So that is a fist, that is a door slamming, that is violence. 1 in 4, 25% will have to deal with that at one point in a lifetime. And once they deal with that, it often is something that happens more often. It is very, very sad if that happens. 1 in 5 women is raped or will be raped in their lifetime. 1 in 5, 20%. Most of them between 18 and 24 years old. It is shocking. It is absolutely shocking how men sometimes use and abuse ladies, women, God's created beings, human beings. It makes you angry. Let alone the statistics on watching pornography, which is in a way using and abusing women from a distance. Right, because they have to perform and do all kinds of things for you to enjoy it behind your screen. It it is not honoring your wife or ladies in general whatsoever. Whatsoever. So it still happens. It's not only from that time. It still happens today. It just happens behind doors more often. It's less visible. So the other side is feminism. And feminism is something that is on the Western agenda at the moment, big time. When you look almost at most hero movies at the moment, who's the hero? It's most often a lady that's the hero. Well, go 15 years back. It was completely the other way around. When you look at most series or movies, who's most often the kind of the loser or the silly one? Just pay attention coming week when you watch television. It is most often the guy who is the silly one, who is the loser, who's the idiot, who comes up with the stupid ideas. And there's a lady that knows it and guides and saves the day. The feministic agenda is very strong nowadays. And that also threatens God's purpose, God's meaning for marriage, as he has intended it to be. So what the world will tell you, and in this passage also, well, let me say, what the world tells us is that women are valuable when they are beautiful and when they are successful. That's a sexy lady. When they are beautiful and successful, which encourages, what does it encourage? When we look at the value of women only when they are beautiful, what do we encourage there? Chauvinism. Because their beauty, their body is the only thing that counts. But God has a radically different message. It is not the looks that make you valuable, it is who you are. You are created in God's image. It is so radically different. But look at any ad on television or anywhere. It is about the looks and it is about being successful. And when you look at successful, what does that encourage? It encourages, in a way, feminism, which goes to the other extreme. Now, I'm not saying that women cannot be successful. I want them to be successful. Please let them be successful because they are created in God's image. But it creates this extreme that only counts, that makes someone valuable. No. That is a lie. That is a permanent lie. Now, does the same thing apply to men? Of course. Of course, it applies to men. Men, your muscles and your beauty doesn't make you valuable as well. Your success, because look at the world. There are so many successful people who are so miserable, who are, in a way, sometimes even killing themselves, even though they got everything. I'll just come to mind this guy from this series, Friends. I don't know who this guy is, but he committed suicide, right? He had everything. He had fame, riches. He was successful. Probably some ladies thought he was beautiful, and yet he was miserable. He had no hope. He had no hope. Now, what does the Bible tell us? Now, the Bible tells you that value does not depend on your outer looks. Verse 3, we see, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear. So this is the message from God. That doesn't determine your value. Now, maybe it's just good to say, I'm not saying that a lady is not allowed to look nice and beautiful, right? So let me have said that, it's okay to dress nicely. We like that. But don't let your identity and your whole life depend on it. And then the next thing is, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very, very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Now you see two things that Peter is kind of here tackling. One is, don't make your value your beauty, which encourages, in a way, a chauvinistic culture. No. This is a message not only for the women, also for the men. Men, the value of your wife does not depend on her beauty, the outer beauty, I mean. It does not. Also, it tackles the other thing, is that the Lord finds a gentle and quiet spirit very precious. Now, this is kind of the opposite of the kind of the ruling roost feministic agenda we see. No. God says, just find your hope. This is the point that Peter points out. Find your hope in me. Lay your hope and your trust and your identity in me. Then what effect will that have? Then you don't have to prove yourself in the world to be successful. You can be a quiet and a peaceful spirit, finding your identity and your roots in God and have peace instead of have strife and stress and fill it out. Now, so this is what God is intending. So this is a message for us for you as ladies, but as well for us as men, because it reflects to us as men, because we need to value the women in the same way that Peter is describing it here, right? So loving our wives or ladies should not depend on whether they are successful or not as well. We love them because God has given them and entrusted them into our lives. That's what counts. Now, if we go with the chauvinistic culture or the feministic culture, there are a few outcomes. There are a few outcomes if that is the agenda, if that's what you go with. Number one is you will have a chauvinist who is married with, I just put it here bluntly, with a doormat, with a lady who is just suppressed, only this, only that. So you have a chauvinist married with a doormat, which is very sad for both of them, really, but very harmful and sacrificial for the lady. Now, the other side, the other opportunity of the possibility will be is that you have a coward of a husband married with a feminist. So you have a feminist who sets the tone, who leads the family, and besides her is a coward, because he's not the man he's supposed to be, and he looks like a weak, in a way, coward. Now, the other opportunity, the number three possibility, is that a chauvinist is married with a feminist, and what you get then is always fighting. It is just not going to work, and most of the times it will end fairly soon. But these are the outcomes. Now, what we really need is the biblical model, because God has not intended marriages to have, for one to be oppressed, for one to look like a weak coward, or for two people fighting. No, God has more. He has created it so beautiful. But in this broken, sinful world, we need to go back to how God has intended it to be, to find the purpose, to get a clear vision on it. And even then, it will be sometimes a struggle. Now, I'm happily married with Grace. Is everything perfect? Is everything going smooth always, all the time? I wish that would be true, but it is a challenge that needs work. But with this perspective and with God's help, we can make progress. Now, I want to give you an example to just emphasize this point between men and women. An example, maybe for some of you, I've mentioned this example before. It's about a shooting and a sinking ship. Now, the first example is a shooting that happened in the Colorado theater shooting on July 20, 2012. What happened there is just a crazy guy was just walked in on, I think it was the release night of the Dark Knight movie. He walked in and he just started shooting people just randomly. Now, in the end, 12 people died and 70 people were injured. But what happened? What happened there while this was playing out? There were some guys who, as soon as it kind of happened, they grabbed their girlfriends or their wives, they threw them on the floor and they lay on top of them to protect them. Now, what happened? Some of those men died. saving their wife or girlfriend. Now, what were they in the newspapers? They were praised. This is the men, these are the kinds of men we are looking for. These are the men we honor, giving their lives for their wives and their girlfriends. This is a man protecting, even at the cost of his own life, if necessary. Now, if the roles will be reversed, what would the headlines then say? If some of the ladies would have grabbed the men, threw them on the floor and lay on top of the men, what would have happened in the newspapers? Cowards! What a coward! I can't believe it is. Did we think this far? Well, that will be exactly the reaction. You see how God has put it in our nature in a way already, that it is normal for the man to protect and to sacrifice when needed. Now, the other example is the sinking ship, the Costa Concordia, in January 13, 2012. So it happened in the same year. What happened? This was this cruise ship at the coast of Italy, and they made water, they capsized, and people needed to be rescued, right? Now, what happened there is that part of the crew and the captain, part of the crew and the captain, they left ship before passengers. They left ship, leaving women and children behind on a sinking ship. 32 people drowned. 20 were injured. Now, the headlines, they scrutinized particularly this captain. Like, how can you, as a captain, responsible for your passengers, and particularly women and children, how can you jump in a lifeboat and let them drown? No. This is unbelievable. See, you can't respect the one who will not love and protect you. For a lady, it is almost impossible to love and respect her husband if he does not love and protect her. That becomes very difficult. And we will see soon that even if that happens, that God will help the wife to still do this, but then it's by God's grace. Now, also, you can't be honoring a person by sacrificing them to save yourself. This captain was not honoring the lives of these ladies and these children. If he would have honored them, he would have given them the lifeboat. So, respecting and honor, they are intertwined with each other. But you cannot respect if there's no honoring. And you cannot honor if you are sacrificing the other. That is simply impossible. Now, when we go to verse 7, let's start with the men. And I do this deliberately because the men, we should go in a way first, I believe. Verse 7, it says, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as a weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. So it is about honoring your wives in an understanding way, to live in an understanding way with her and to honor her. Now, to honor, what does that mean? You can come up with so many words, but to honor is to admonish, to cherish, to celebrate, to care for, to treasure, to adore, to value, to love, to respect. This is honoring your wives, our wives. Now, I'm just giving a list because I found it helpful for myself, and I believe it might be helpful for some of you. How can you honor your wives in an understanding way? In which areas can we do this, or can we maybe grow? Maybe you're good in some areas and maybe you can grow in some other areas. First of all, spiritually, you can honor your wife and spiritually, which means in a way you pray for her. You read the Bible with her. You bring her to God. So you talk about you talk about the biblical truths with her. You encourage her from the Bible, from God. You pray for her. So spiritually, you could do it in so many different ways. Physically, how to honor her physically? Well, to honor her physically is not with a fist. It is with a gentle hand. It is with care. So you handle her with care, not with violence. That would be the opposite. Emotionally, relationally, are you taking time to listen, to be there, to hear her out, even if it is for the third time? Hear her out. That's what I needed to learn. To sometimes listen again and listen one more time. But to be there, to connect emotionally, relationally, to cry with her when needed, to be there with her when needed. I had this emotionally, relationally, this was one of the first lessons I had to learn when Grace and I got married. The first 5 years of our marriage, God did not give us any children yet. Grace was struggling with this really, really hard. But emotionally, I was so far behind. It took me, I think, 2 or 3 years to catch up with her, to sit down finally with her and to cry together with her, to align with her. And it was a lesson I needed to learn there, that God asked me, are you there with your wife? Are you there with her just physically, or are you there mentally, emotionally with her? And that sometimes takes a stretch. Verbally, how can we honor our wives verbally? How do you talk about your wife? Which words do you use to describe your wife, what she's doing, what she means for you in your life? Which words do you use when you have people over for dinner? Do you use encouraging words, or are you degrading her and ordering her around? How do you honor her verbally with your words? Financially, do you take the first responsibility to take care financially for the family? Are you taking the biggest load on your shoulders to provide for your family? This does not mean that women are not able to work and provide as well, but are you taking the first responsibility for that? Statistics show that when the husband earns 70% or more of the household income, that women are happier. That's all across the board. So it shows something. And then last but not least, technologically, are we able to put our phones away when we sit down with our wives? Are we able to shut it down and close technology off to spend time with our wives? This can be a difficult one, but you can really honor your wives with that. Another maybe practical one is, don't bring your phone into your bedroom. Charge your phone somewhere else. Don't do it in your bedroom. If you have a television in your bedroom, I would, in a way, encourage you to leave the television on somewhere else. This is a time where you're together. And other times as well, of course. So I think you get the point. Okay. So men, this is for you guys. Now, verse 1 and 2. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by their conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. So this is about respecting and, in a way, submitting, following your husband. Now, let me say up front, respecting and following your husband does not mean that you stay in an abusive situation. That is not what that means. You need to find help if that is the case. You need to find help, and you need to come to a solution, because that is not what God has intended. Because then we've got something to say to this man. Honor your wife. Handle her with care and with love. But for the wives, the challenge is to respect and to submit to their husbands, to follow their husbands. Now, to respect is to notice, to regard, to honor, to prefer, to defer to encourage, to love and to admire. And who knows? You might even win your husband for Christ if he's not a believer yet. And you know what? I've seen it happen in my lifetime. You will not be the first, and you will not be the last. I've seen it with a lady, I think about 6-7 years ago. She came to church. Her husband was not a believer yet. She came once a month Why? Because her husband allowed her to go to church once a month. He was not a believer yet. And she said, okay, I find this really difficult because I really want to be here, but I'm going to choose to respect my husband, to show respect to him, to follow him in this way. Once a month became twice a month. Twice a month became him joining her. And at this moment, as we speak, they are sitting together at church. Probably about now. Him a believer as well. She won her husband because of kind of her conduct towards him. I think that was a crucial role. If she would have forced herself in, I'm going to church every month, I'm going to do this, regardless of, he would have felt very disrespected, and it will probably push him away big time. Now, I think there might be, well, probably more, but 3 areas to show respect for your husband. And the first one, maybe to make clear, I did not come up with this myself. I learned this from a senior pastor lady who brought this kind of to the table. And she said, respectful thoughts. That's kind of where it begins. How do you think about your husband? Do you think about your husband as a loser? Do you think about your husband as, I can do this better? Do you think about his husband, oh my goodness, again, a stupid mistake you're making, or a very silly decision again? How do you think about him? And sometimes he will make a silly mistake. Yes, I admit it. Adam needed help. We still need help. But what thoughts do you have for him? Respectful words. How do you talk to him? Are you always arguing with him? Or are you following him and encouraging him and coming with maybe different thoughts and suggestions and ideas? And because, or we'll get into that, well, which words do you use? The same, husbands can use very nasty words when people are over. Women can do the same. They can be very belittling towards their husbands when family or friends are over. And are you respectfully helping or supporting your husband? Are you supporting him in a way, in maybe God's calling for his life? And God's calling for his life can look quite differently. One becomes a plumber, another one becomes a banker, another one becomes a doctor. But we all have also callings of leading and our families and raising our children and participating in church, growing. Do you help him, and are you alongside with your husband in his God-given calling, which in a way becomes your calling for the both of you, right? Because you're one. You're on the same goal trajectory with the same mindset in a way. Now, we do need, because I think this is a sensitive topic as well, and we need to, in a way, get this right. I want to mention a few things, what kind of submission and respect is not and what it is. Now, it is not that a husband has ultimate power. Absolutely not. Jesus has ultimate power. And if there's really trouble of violence or domestic violence or sexual abuse, ladies, find help. Come to one of the leaders. Because your husband does not have ultimate power to destroy your life. Absolutely not. It also doesn't mean that women don't have independent thoughts. In a lot of cases, women have better independent thoughts than men. It also doesn't mean that wives don't seek to influence their husband. If anyone influences me as a pastor, as a husband, as a father, it is grace. So it absolutely does not mean that you can't influence, in a way, your husband. Wives, it also does not mean that wives must obey husbands to command and obey husbands who command to sin. No. If it goes against Jesus, if you're blatantly sinning, then kind of that's where the line is. That's where the line is. And it also does not mean that a woman is less intelligent or competent than her husband. Now, what does it mean? It does mean that husband and wife are equal, but they are complementarian. They have different responsibilities and roles. It does mean that this is how God has intended marriage and how he put those two together. It does mean that wives submit like Jesus in Gethsemane. Jesus submitted to God the Father. Is Jesus any less than God the Father? No. Jesus is equal to God the Father, yet he submitted to God the Father. Now, this is what the Bible tells us what submission in a way means. And above that, of course, we as husbands, we submit to Jesus as well. Right? It does mean that husbands should lead like Jesus sacrificially. This is what it should mean. It also means that a single woman should only marry a man she can actually follow spiritually. So if you're single, not married yet, or want to get married or remarried, it is important that you marry a man who you can follow spiritually, so that he is a Christian, that he is a believer, a faithful believer. And it does mean that the Christian marriage reflects the Trinity and the gospel. Well, we established that right in the beginning. So the main message is for women to subject and respect their husbands, and for husbands to live in an understanding way with their wives, honoring them. Okay. Now, I'm going to read the next few verses, and they are in a way more general to the church. I'll make a few comments, and then we're going to celebrate communion with one another. So the next verses after this passage is, finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless, for to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Now, this is what Peter is describing here is kind of the upside down reality in the church. What Peter is describing here, how the church should function and how we should relate to one another, is kind of upside down from culture. Because it says we should love, we should care, we should be unified together. And what do we see in the world? Well, we see in the world chaos. It is chaotic in the world. It is cruel in the world. It is full of division in the world and selfishness. This causes so much pain, havoc in the world. Now, what Peter is describing here is kind of the upside down reality. This is what he is encouraging us to do. To love, to care for one another, to be unified in mind with one another. Now, how is this possible? How is this possible to be loving, caring, and unified? Because we all have pledged to submit to God. That is the only way to love, to care, and to be unified. Right? That is the only way. In the world, everyone has their own opinion. Everyone goes their own way. That's why it's so chaotic. The only way to find peace, love, care, unity is that we all, in a way, this morning again say, yes, Lord, we follow you. Even if it is difficult, even if it is hard, even if it goes against our own feelings or opinions, we follow you. And then we will find each other unified. We find each other helping, because it is not always easy or simple. Let's be honest about that. Okay. Now, if we talk about this being unified, then it is such a privilege that we will be able to celebrate communion in a few minutes. Because we are unified, and this is shown in having communion together. Because ultimately we are unified in the sacrifice that Jesus gave for us, right? So I'll read it again from 1 Corinthians 11. For Paul says, therefore, I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night when he was betrayed, he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it, and he said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, also, he took the cup after supper, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. We are unified because Christ has brought us together in his sacrifice. He died for us. His blood was shed for us. Why? Why was his blood shed for us? Because we were chaotic. We were going our own way. We were sinful. We were going against God. But he died for all those things to bring us back together in unity, following him. This is a privilege. So I invite, I forgot, I think Esther or Jonathan and Marijke were going to, yes, to invite you to come here and to thank for the fact that we can have communion together.